Ephraim feeds on the wind, on the ruach. So, in the literal sense of what we understand as wind, is as somebody who eats nothing. No matter what he eats, he doesn't receive any nutrition from it. Is as if he were eating just air. So he won't be fed correctly, and therefore he would eat eventually. And that's pretty much what we see in the congregations of the world when they teach false doctrines, which are pretty much as fast food. So if they only feed on that, they will eventually have a problem in their spiritual health and could die in judgment. So here, other than the literal that I just mentioned, or the fact that they eat doctrines that do not feed them, is the fact that they really crave ruach, or spirits. They want to feel different things and experience certain things that are not really knowledge or wisdom or come from the Almighty. They just want to feel. So they end up in certain religions or doctrines where different spirits work on the people and make them feel things, but that do not build them up. Meaning they may have certain good feelings, they may have a certain experience, like in Christianity where they fall, and like when they dance like crazy. Not, I don't mean regular dancing for praise. I mean when there's a spirit that enters them and they start dancing very like in a frantic, crazy type of way, or when they supposedly speak in tongues, or when they laugh uncontrollably, or when they there are some that even growl and howl and act like animals. They sometimes walk in as if they were beasts, which are things that people do when they are possessed. So to see those things in certain churches, and you can look it up on Google or YouTube, is to show that many Christian churches are just looking for a spirit to make them feel something, and they think that if that something is clearly visible, then it comes from the Creator, which makes no sense, of course. But it's part of what we see here when it says Ephraim feeds on the wind, other than what I already said, the false doctrines. And because of those false doctrines, they end up seeking spirits that do not come from the Almighty. And pursues the east wind, which is the wind that comes from the place where the sun comes up, which represents a hot wind which burns. So therefore it represents throughout scriptures the spirit of the abomination of desolation, which will appear in the east. When it does, as Yahushua said, when you see the abomination of desolation in the place where it should not be, those who are in the city go to the mountains, and those who are at work and those who are at home. And he says not to go back and take anything, all of it that we already know as the second Exodus. And we find in Matthew 24, Luke 17, and Mark 13. So Ephraim, the many, feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind, the false Messiah, the spirit of error. He daily increases lies and desolation, confirming what I said regarding the east wind being the spirit that will enter the body of the false Messiah to become the abomination of desolation. He daily increases lies and desolation. Not only that, Yahushua is the truth. Therefore, the false Messiah, the abomination of desolation, is the lie. He daily, Ephraim, the many, increases lies and desolation. Also, they make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried to Egypt. As I have explained many times, the Assyrians, or the Assyrian Empire, represents the world government of the end times, the New World Order. So the Assyrian is a representation, a title that is connected to the first beast, the little horn, while Egypt represents the false religion of the world of the end times, and therefore Pharaoh would represent the Pope, the false prophet. So also they make a covenant with the Assyrians. Instead of making a covenant with Yahweh, instead of accepting the Torah, which is the covenant Yahweh made with us through Yahushua HaMashiach, of course, meaning the new covenant which he made through his blood, which was actually the one that Yahweh promised, which he was representing by the covenant made with Abraham through the circumcision and with Moshe with the Torah. Yahushua fulfilled it in every way, and many others that I didn't mention. So he daily increases lies and desolation. Also they make a covenant with the Assyrians. So instead of accepting the truth of Yahweh to have the peace that surpasses all understanding, for instance, they make a covenant with the enemy, with the beast. So they accept the world government, they accept what the world government is offering them, and they see it as salvation. So they make a covenant with the Assyrians, like nowadays when people trust the government more than they trust Yahweh or the scriptures, or even the one they believe in, of course, because they are afraid. And it is all connected because the God of this world, the Elohim of this world, is Satan. So that is why the media of this world is feeding them fear. So that is why the people who worship that God are fearful, because the God of this world is telling them how to feel through COVID and all of that. So they make a covenant with the Assyrians, and oil is carried to Egypt. So we see covenant with the Assyrians. I already mentioned what that would represent. But oil represents the covering of the spirit. Oil represents spirit. So the anointed one, which was the high priest or the king, those two were anointed with oil, representing that they had the covering of the spirit. So the fact that it says oil is carried to Egypt shows how Egypt, in this case, in this context, is representing the spiritual part of the government of the end times, because it's the connection to the oil, which represents spirit. So an oil is carried to Egypt. So their spirit goes to Egypt, not to Israel, not to Yahweh. Remember also that in Revelation 11 we see that the two witnesses will be killed in the place that spiritually is called Egypt, and they are killed where Mashiach was killed. So that means that Jerusalem, or even Israel, is as Egypt spiritually, as Revelation 11 says. I say that so that we understand that Egypt is not having to do, or we don't get the image of the actual Egypt as everybody remembers it, but it's talking about the spirit that was within Egypt and how it led, for instance, Pharaoh to enslave the people. That same spirit would be working through religion, through enslaved people with commandments of men, for instance. It would look very different, but it would be the same ruach, the same spirit. That's why it talks about the oil being carried to Egypt. They are thinking that they're going to Israel or to the people of Yahweh or to Yahweh, but instead they are going to Egypt, to the spirit of error, to the enemy. So that's the point regarding how it says there about Egypt, but in Revelation 11 we see that Israel of nowadays, or Israel, the state of Israel nowadays, is actually as Egypt of back in the day.